The bell over the door chimed. A biker, Marcus Taylor, stepped into Mama Joe's table, the quiet diner that still smelled of coffee and fried cornmeal. Conversations stopped. Forks froze midair. 2 police officers entered right after him, hands resting on their holsters. The taller one, Leon Grady, eyed Marcus as if danger had walked in wearing leather. "You can't stay here," he said. Aaliyah Brooks came out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "He hasn't done a thing," she said. "Everyone who walks through that door gets a seat." Leon's fingers twitched near his gun. The room held its breath. Marcus kept his eyes on the table. From the corner booth, a man in a work jacket, Harlan Dupree, watched quietly, coffee untouched. Leon muttered, "Suit yourself," and turned away. Chairs scraped, customers left. When the door closed, the diner fell silent. Only Aaliyah, the biker, and the stranger remained. Morning light slipped through the cracked blinds of Mama Joe's table. The walls were the color of old butter, paint peeling in thin curls that caught the dust. The sign outside had lost half its gold letters, but the name still showed. Barely. On the counter sat a stack of unpaid bills, corners curled, ink faded. Aaliyah Brooks moved through the diner with quiet precision, wiping the same tables her mother once did. The air still carried the scent of burnt sugar and grease, like a memory that refused to fade. Her father's medication list hung by the register, a reminder of another debt waiting. She paused under her mother's framed photo, the one taken the day they reopened the diner after repainting the front. "You said no one leaves hungry," she whispered. "I'm still trying." Outside, the street was empty. Since the police incident, people crossed to the other sidewalk rather than pass her window. The silence had shape now, thick, almost physical. Still, she switched on the old radio, gospel static filling the air. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the corner booth, steam brushing her cheek. The diner looked tired but alive. One chair wobbled, one light flickered, yet everything was in its place. She reached for her notebook and wrote 2 words under the column of expenses. "Keep open." A gust of wind rattled the window. The world outside moved on without her. But inside, Aaliyah kept the lights burning, one small act against the dark. Each morning, before the town fully woke, Harlan Dupree walked into Mama Joe's table. His work jacket smelled faintly of asphalt and dust. He always chose the same booth near the window, the one where the morning light fell across the cracked vinyl seat. From there, he watched Aaliyah move through the room like she'd been built into its rhythm, quiet, deliberate, steady. She greeted everyone who came in, even those who barely nodded back. When a delivery man dropped coins instead of bills for his breakfast, she still thanked him, smiling as if it didn't sting. Harlan noticed she never checked the tip jar, never sighed when it stayed empty. One morning, after finishing his eggs, he placed a folded 20 under the coffee mug. Aaliyah slid it back toward him. "Help somebody who needs it," she said. "I'm fine." He studied her for a moment. "You're not afraid they'll hate you for what happened?" She met his eyes. "If folks hate someone for doing right, then they've forgotten their manners." Her tone was simple, not proud, not angry, just true. Harlan opened his worn notebook once she turned away. In the margin he wrote, "Kindness sustained despite isolation." The pen paused, then underlined sustained. He came again the next day, and the next. Never many words between them, only small exchanges that seemed to weigh more than they should. He asked once why she kept the diner open when no one came. "Because closing it would mean they won," she said, "and I'm not ready to lose my mother's table." A delivery truck rumbled by outside, shaking the glass. Aaliyah steadied a stack of plates without breaking stride. Harlan watched her hands, strong, certain, tired. When he left, she wiped the counter he'd sat at, humming along to the gospel song on the radio. From the doorway, he looked back once, committing the image to memory. a lone woman in a half-empty diner, still serving, still believing. In his notebook that night, Harlan added one more line beneath his note. Observation phase. Hope detected. Marcus Taylor came back 3 days later. His jacket was the same, but his hands trembled when he reached for the door. The white hospital band still circled his wrist, the ink half faded. He sat at the counter without looking up. Aaliyah noticed the bracelet before she noticed his eyes. "You all right?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "My daughter's at Elkridge Medical," he said. 15, stage 4. The words fell slow, like he had to pull each one through his chest. "They told me to stay close. Just wait." Aaliyah didn't rush to fill the silence. She cleared the counter, poured him fresh coffee, and slid the cup toward him. "No one should eat alone when they're hurting," she said. Marcus tried to thank her, but his voice caught. He looked at the mug instead, both hands wrapped around it like it might keep him steady. The steam blurred his reflection. From his usual booth, Harlan closed his notebook halfway, watching. He saw how Aaliyah never asked for names, never asked for proof. Just action, quiet and simple. He wrote down one line in careful letters. Empathy, genuine, non-reactive kindness. The diner was nearly empty, but it felt full in a way that wasn't about bodies. A woman trying to keep her mother's promise, a father trying not to break, a stranger measuring hope. Marcus ate slowly, each bite a kind of prayer. Aaliyah kept working behind the counter, humming softly to herself. Harlan stayed still, his coffee untouched, pen balanced between his fingers. For a long minute, none of them spoke. The sound of the ceiling fan brushed through the quiet, steady as breathing. 3 people, 3 kinds of pain, held in one small room that somehow felt like shelter. By the end of the week, Ridgway had already made up its mind. Word spread faster than smoke. She served one of them, people said. A biker, a criminal. Someone claimed he'd seen a gun. Another said she'd laughed with him. By morning, it wasn't rumor anymore. It was truth rewritten by fear. Old customers stopped showing up. The regular truckers drove past without looking at the windows. At the grocery store, women who once shared recipes with Aaliyah now turned their backs. Even the pastor's wife crossed the street rather than walk by her door. That afternoon, Officer Leon Grady pulled up in his cruiser, a smile too sharp for the heat. "Permit issue," he said, waving a clipboard. "Wrong signature on your fire code renewal. Got to shut the power off till it's fixed." Aaliyah stared at him. "That paper's been cleared for months." He shrugged. "Then you shouldn't mind waiting for confirmation." When the lights went dark, he tipped his hat and left. The hum of the fridge died. The ceiling fan slowed to a stop. The silence felt heavier than noise. Aaliyah lit a candle behind the counter, flame shaking in the draft. She brewed coffee on the old gas stove, the smell cutting through the emptiness. 1 cup for herself, 1 for the man in the corner who still came every day. Harlan looked at her across the dim light. "You're still open," he said. "Still breathing," she replied. "That's close enough." He nodded slowly. "You think people can really be good, even when it costs them?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "I think most people want to be. They just forget how when someone else is watching." Outside, a car passed, its headlights flashing across the boarded windows. The flame on the candle bent sideways, then straightened again. Harlan took a sip of coffee and studied her face, the calm there that didn't match the mess around them. "You don't seem scared," he said. "I am," she admitted, "but fear's not a reason to close the door." He nodded, writing a quiet note in his book that she couldn't see. When she turned away, the light caught the edge of the sign outside. Half the bulbs burned out, 1 letter hanging loose. The town had shut her out completely, but she kept the doors open anyway, and in that faint circle of candlelight, her defiance looked almost holy. The diner sat in darkness that night. No hum from the fridge, no song from the radio. only the sound of Aaliyah's rag moving across the counter, slow and steady. The walls smelled of cleaner and old smoke. Outside, the town had gone quiet, but not kindly quiet, more like it was waiting for her to give up. When she stepped to the front window, she saw it. Red paint scrawled across the glass, thick and uneven. Traitor. The letters dripped like blood in the faint glow from the street lamp. She stood there for a long moment, motionless. Then she fetched a bucket of water, dipped the rag, and began to wipe. A truck roared past. Something hit the window. Thud, then a wet slide down the glass. Egg. Another followed, bursting with a sharp crack. Yellow streaks mixed with red paint dripping to the sill. She didn't flinch. She just wiped harder. Her voice came low, almost like she was speaking to the room. Still have to clean. Still have to make it to morning. The rag slipped in her hand. The smell of egg and ammonia filled the air. She opened the window just enough for the night air to move through. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and then stopped. Across the road, in a van parked beneath the trees, Harlan watched through a small monitor. The camera feed flickered, catching her movements. One woman, alone, washing hate off her own windows. A voice came through his earpiece. Phase 2 complete. Social isolation achieved. He didn't answer. On the screen, she rinsed the rag, pressed it to the glass again. The paint smeared, fading little by little until her reflection began to show through. He leaned forward, eyes fixed. "Don't forget she's human," he said softly. Inside the diner, Aaliyah dropped the rag into the bucket and straightened up. Her arms trembled, her breath heavy. She looked around the empty space, the chairs stacked, the floor damp, the walls marked but cleaner than before. She walked to the back table where her mother's photo hung and brushed the dust from its frame. "You said people show who they are when no one's looking," she whispered. "Guess I'm finding out." The clock above the counter ticked once, then stopped. The candle she'd lit burned low, its wax pooling at the base. She sat down in the booth, her face caught between the shadow and the glow, the word traitor still faintly visible behind her. Across the street, Harlan closed the monitor and sat in the dark, the hum of the van the only sound. For the first time since the experiment began, he looked uncertain. The next morning, the faucet coughed twice and went silent. No water, not even a drip. The notice on the door from the utility office read temporary service suspension, maintenance pending. Aaliyah didn't bother to read the rest. She filled a metal bowl with melted ice from the freezer and carried it to the front window. The glass still held traces of last night's paint, faint red shadows that refused to fade. She dipped the rag in the cold water, wrung it out, and began again. Each stroke left a streak of ice across the pane, each breath fogging it slightly. Outside, 2 boys biked past. One slowed, pulled a marker from his pocket, and scrawled "Go home" across the lower edge of the window. The other laughed. They were gone before she could step outside. Aaliyah stood there, staring at the words. Then she smiled, small, tired, but real, and wiped them away. The marker smeared into gray, then disappeared beneath the rag. She whispered, "If I stop cleaning, they win." The bell above the door jingled softly. Marcus Taylor stood there, eyes dark from sleepless nights, hospital bracelet still faint on his wrist. He took in the buckets, the half-scrubbed window, the exhaustion on her face. "You're still here," he said. "Still trying," she answered. He looked around the empty diner. "Why keep fighting? They don't deserve you." She pressed the rag to the glass again. "If I start hating like them, who's left to be kind?" Marcus watched her for a long moment, then grabbed another rag from the counter. "Where do you want me?" She blinked. "You don't have to." He dipped the rag into the bowl anyway and began wiping the other side of the window. "I want to." For a while, neither spoke, just the sound of wet fabric and shallow breathing. The glass cleared inch by inch until their reflections met. 2 people side by side, framed by a single, fragile light. When they finished, she leaned against the counter, hand on her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus nodded. "You make it hard to pretend." She frowned. "Pretend what?" He didn't answer. His jaw tightened. The silence stretched between them like something dangerous. He set the rag down, pulled out his phone, and stepped outside. In the quiet street, he dialed a number. "Darius," he said, voice low. "I can't keep doing this. She doesn't know it's all fake. Me, the cops, even the damn power cut. But she's still out here, fighting for people she thinks are real." A pause. The voice on the other end muttered something sharp. "No," Marcus said. "You don't get it. She's not acting. We are. She's the only one telling the truth." He looked back through the window, where Aaliyah stood straightening chairs as if the world hadn't just turned against her. "She's doing it for real," he whispered, "and that makes the rest of us look small." Then he hung up, slipped the phone into his jacket, and walked off down the street, the hospital band catching one last glint of light before it vanished. The morning came gray and windless. Aaliyah unlocked the front door of Mama Joe's table out of habit more than hope. The chairs were still stacked. The air still smelled faintly of last night's cleaning solution. She straightened the salt shakers, brewed a half pot of coffee, and waited. No one came. By 9 o'clock she had wiped the same counter 3 times. A fly circled the empty pie case. Outside, Main Street stretched silent and bare, the town pretending she no longer existed. She poured herself a cup and sat by the window, chin resting on her hand. The quiet was so complete she could hear the tick of the old clock above the door. Then, faintly, a low hum rolled through the stillness. She lifted her head. It faded. A minute later, it came again, closer this time. A rumble like distant thunder. 1 engine, then 2, then 10. The sound thickened until it became a pulse through the pavement. Windows shook. Coffee rippled in the cup. Aaliyah stood, unsure whether to lock the door or step outside. The noise grew into a wall of vibration. And then they appeared. Motorcycles cresting the hill, chrome catching the sunlight, leather jackets glinting with red and black patches. Not 1 or 2, but dozens, then hundreds. They filled both sides of the street, engines growling in rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that made every storefront tremble. Curtains twitched, shop doors slammed. Across the road, Officer Leon and 2 deputies hurried to their cruisers, hands near their belts. The bikes slowed, then stopped. The engines idled, roaring like animals trying to breathe. The lead rider dismounted. Marcus Taylor. The same hospital band still faint on his wrist, the same steady eyes. He removed his helmet, held it at his side, and walked toward the diner. The crowd of riders parted for him, a river opening around a stone. Aaliyah stood at the doorway, apron dusted with flour, heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus stopped at the steps. For a moment, no one moved. Then he set his helmet on the ground and said, calm and clear, "We came for breakfast." The words fell like a spark into dry air. A few riders laughed quietly. Someone called out, "Hope there's enough coffee." Another echoed it, and suddenly the sound wasn't threat. It was life. Engines shut off one by one. Boots hit the pavement. Laughter replaced the growl of machines. The street filled not with fear, but with warmth, the wild, human kind that follows courage. Aaliyah exhaled for the first time in hours. Behind her, the candle from the night before still sat on the counter, its wick cold but upright, like it had been waiting for this very noise to mean something. The street outside Mama Joe's table had turned into a slow-moving tide of engines and leather. One by one, the riders parked, removed their helmets, and walked toward the diner. The air smelled of fuel and morning coffee. No one shouted. No one pushed. They lined up, quiet, disciplined, waiting their turn at the door. Aaliyah's hands trembled as she filled mugs and slid plates down the counter. Every seat was taken, every booth full. The sound inside was nothing like chaos. It was steady, low laughter, forks against plates, people saying thank you. The same town that once whispered her name now stood outside watching, stunned. A biker with a scar across his cheek laid 2 bills on the counter. "Keep the change," he said. Another woman in a red vest left a folded note that read, "For the lights you kept on. Everyone paid double, some triple. No one asked for receipts." Behind the counter, Aaliyah moved like someone trying not to wake from a dream. "I don't understand," she whispered. Darius, tall and broad-shouldered, appeared at the sink. "You look like you could use a hand," he said, rolling up his sleeves. He began washing dishes as if he'd done it all his life. Carissa, the deputy who once stood silent beside Officer Leon, approached next. No uniform now, only a gray shirt and tired eyes. "Miss Aaliyah," she said, voice shaking. "I was part of what happened here. I didn't speak up when I should have. I'm sorry." Aaliyah froze, sponge dripping in her hand. "You don't owe me." "Yes, I do," Carissa said. "You were kind when we weren't." For a moment the noise softened. Forks stilled. Even the coffee machine hissed more quietly. Aaliyah blinked fast, trying not to cry. "Why are you all here?" she asked. From the back of the room came a voice she hadn't heard in days. Calm. Even. Familiar. "Because it's time you knew." Harlan stepped forward from the crowd, no longer in his dusty work jacket. He removed his cap, setting it on the counter. The lines on his face looked deeper now, but his eyes were clear. "My name isn't Harlan the Handyman," he began. "It's Harlan Dupree, founder of the New Dawn Foundation." A silence rippled through the diner. Even the street outside went still, engines idling lower. "For the past month," he said, "we've been running a test here in Ridgeway, a social trial. We wanted to see how a community reacts when judgment feels easier than grace." A murmur spread. Someone in the back muttered, "A test?" Harlan nodded. Every part of it, the rumors, the shutdowns, the uniformed officers, even Marcus's visit, was part of an experiment. Not to humiliate this town, but to measure its heart. He turned toward Marcus, who stood by the door, helmet tucked under one arm. "Some of us were actors," Harlan continued, "but what we found wasn't written in any script." He faced Aaliyah. "You didn't know. You had no reason to be kind. Yet you opened your door, defended a stranger, and kept doing what was right when the world told you not to." Her mouth parted. Words caught somewhere between disbelief and anger. All of this wasn't real? "The cruelty was," Harlan said softly. "But so was your courage." The crowd listened, breaths held. He took a step closer, his voice steady but thick at the edges. "You saved this town's dignity, Miss Aaliyah. When others failed the test, you reminded us what decency looks like." Aaliyah's hands found the edge of the counter. She gripped it to stay upright. "You set me up," she said, barely audible. "I did," Harlan answered, "and you proved me wrong." He looked around the room, at the bikers, the townspeople gathering in the doorway, the cameras half hidden in corners now visible. "We came here expecting to record another story of division. Instead, we found one woman who refused to forget her humanity." The room swelled with a sound that wasn't applause yet but close. Soft murmurs, sniffled breaths, a few hands clapping once, twice. Marcus stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket. A small leather vest stitched with new thread. On the back, in clean white letters, it read, "Friend of the Road. Protected." He held it out to her. "From us," he said, "for the woman who remembered what people forgot." Aaliyah stared at it, eyes wet. She looked at Harlan. "What happens now?" Harlan smiled gently. "Now the world hears your story. Mama Joe's table will be the first site in the new Elk Ridge Rebuild program. We'll restore the street, the businesses, the homes, but it starts here, with you." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Darius clapped once, and the room followed. Slow, heavy, rising like thunder. Aaliyah covered her face, laughing and crying all at once. Outside, the bikers cheered, engines roaring again, not as warning, but as celebration. The sound filled the air, rolling through the valley, a roar of gratitude, of release, of something bigger than the test itself. And through the noise, Harlan's voice carried one last sentence. "You didn't just pass, Miss Aaliyah. You reminded us what it means to be human." For a long moment, no one in Mama Joe's table moved. The applause slowly faded into something softer, silence charged with awe. Then a sound broke it, a chair scraping, hesitant footsteps, and the voice of an older man near the back. "I was one of the first to stop coming here," he said quietly. His hands twisted the brim of his hat. "Thought I was keeping peace. Turns out I was just being a coward." He looked at Aaliyah. "I'm sorry, miss. Truly." Aaliyah didn't speak. She nodded once, eyes shimmering. Then another voice. Mrs. Langford, who used to run the bakery next door. "You fed my son when he couldn't pay last winter," she said, "and I didn't even defend you. I'm ashamed." More followed. One by one, people who had turned away began to step forward. Shopkeepers, neighbors, even teenagers who had thrown eggs. The air filled with murmurs of regret, quiet and uneven, but real. Marcus stood near the counter, helmet tucked beneath his arm. "When Harlan called me," he said, "I thought this was just a job. Pretend to be trouble, test how folks react. Easy money." His voice cracked slightly. "But you—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "You weren't supposed to care, and somehow you did. You made me believe there's still something worth protecting." He extended his hand. Aaliyah hesitated, then took it. The crowd clapped again, but this time it sounded different. No cheering, just gratitude. Outside, the street that once carried whispers now filled with laughter. Children ran between the parked motorcycles holding tiny rags and paper towels. A few of the bikers knelt, showing them how to polish chrome without scratching it. Two little girls dragged a trash bin from the corner, dumping wrappers into it. Aaliyah stepped outside. The morning light struck the freshly cleaned window, the same one that had carried the word traitor only days before. Now it reflected faces, black, brown, pale, all watching her with something close to pride. Harlan joined her at the doorway, his notebook in hand. "You changed the outcome of an experiment, Miss Aaliyah," he said. "That doesn't happen often." "I didn't change anything," she replied softly. "People just remembered who they were." He smiled. "Exactly why Project Decency begins here." Her brow furrowed. "Project Decency?" He turned toward the cameras that had begun to roll, operators in gray jackets moving quietly among the crowd. New Dawn Foundation is launching a program to rebuild towns that lost their sense of community. We're calling it Project Decency. He gestured toward the diner. And Mama Joe's table will be the first sight. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The cameras zoomed in on Aaliyah, still in her flour-stained apron, her expression unreadable. Inside, Carissa sat at the counter, watching. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small, genuine thing that reached her eyes. Behind her, Officer Leon stood by the door, hat in his hands, gaze low. When Aaliyah caught his eye, he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of guilt he couldn't put into words. Outside, Darius and Marcus began setting up folding tables. The bikers unloaded crates of food, bread, fruit, milk. Someone strung lights along the awning. Within minutes, the entire street buzzed with life again. Children painted a new sign on the front window. The letters were uneven but bright. "Everyone's welcome here." Aaliyah leaned against the doorframe, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered to Harlan. "You already did," he said. "You stayed open." The cameras panned across the scene. Carissa pouring coffee for townspeople, Leon helping fix the broken signpost, Marcus laughing with a group of kids. The same place that had been a battlefield of silence was now humming with renewal. When the last bike engine started again, it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like applause made of steel in motion. Harlan looked toward Aaliyah one last time. "What began as a test," he said, voice low, "just became proof that decency still exists." And for the first time in months, Ridgeway didn't feel like a divided town anymore. It felt like a heartbeat, steady, shared, alive. A year later, Ridgeway no longer looked like the same town. The cracked sidewalks had been repaired, new paint brightened the storefronts, and the air carried the smell of coffee and blooming magnolia instead of dust. Mama Joe's table stood at the center of it all. Walls a deep honey yellow, windows polished, a hand-painted sign above the door reading, "Kindness built this place." Every morning, people filled the booths before sunrise. Farmers, students, families, and bikers passing through, all met here as if the town had decided that the only way to start a day was around Aaliyah's counter. The bell over the door never seemed to rest. Aaliyah moved through the space with quiet grace. She still wore her mother's apron, now patched at the corners, but her face had changed. Softer, open, carrying peace instead of strain. Beside her at the sink was Carissa, her hair tied back, laughing as she wiped a spill with practiced ease. The badge was gone. In its place hung a name tag that read, "Manager." "You ever think you'd be working here?" Aaliyah asked, handing her a plate. Carissa shook her head. "Never thought I'd earn the right to," she said, "but you gave me a second chance." "I just handed you a towel," Aaliyah smiled. "You did the rest." The doorbell chimed again. A hush rolled through the diner. Not the fearful kind, but a warm ripple of recognition. Marcus Taylor stepped inside. He looked stronger now, his beard trimmed, his jacket clean but worn at the seams. At his side was a girl with bright brown eyes and a scar of old fatigue still resting under them. "Morning, Miss Aaliyah," Marcus said, voice steady. "Hope we didn't miss breakfast." "You never could," she said, beaming. "And this must be Jessie." The girl nodded shyly. "Daddy said you make the best cornbread in the state." Aaliyah laughed. "He's only wrong about the state part. It's the best in 3. Jessie giggled, and Marcus's eyes softened. "Today's her first good day," he said quietly. "No hospital, no pain. She wanted to spend it here." For a moment, Aaliyah didn't speak. She just nodded, throat tight, then led them to the same booth Marcus had sat in a year ago. The sunlight fell across the table in the same pattern as before, but everything else had changed. Outside, the town's main street buzzed with life. A community garden stretched across what used to be an empty lot. The hardware store had reopened under new ownership, and the once abandoned factory now housed a local training center funded by the New Dawn Foundation. Harlan Dupree arrived just before noon. No disguise this time. He wore a clean gray suit, his foundation's emblem pinned neatly to the lapel. He paused at the doorway, taking in the laughter, the full tables, the scent of pancakes and syrup. Aaliyah noticed him immediately and grinned. "You still drink your coffee black?" "Only if it's yours," he said, sliding onto a stool. Carissa poured him a cup and he accepted it with a nod. "You kept the promise," he said. "Which one?" Aaliyah teased. "The one you didn't know you made," Harlan replied. "You proved that decency doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling." Aaliyah smiled, quiet and proud. People just needed to see what it looked like again. He glanced toward the window, where the town's new banner hung between 2 lampposts. In neat white letters on red fabric, it read, "Rebuilt by Kindness." Children ran past, chasing a ball down the street. One stopped, pressed his face against the diner window, and waved. Aaliyah waved back with a towel still in her hand. Marcus leaned back in his booth, his daughter eating cornbread beside him. "You know," he said, half smiling, "I used to think strength meant not needing anyone. Turns out it's just about knowing who deserves a seat at your table. Aaliyah tilted her head. Then you better keep coming back. There's always a seat here. He laughed, the sound easy and light. You might regret saying that. My girl eats like a champion. Then I'll make 2 pans next time. Across the counter, Harlan closed his notebook. We've expanded Project Decency to 7 towns now, he said. But none of them started like this. None had a heart like yours. Aaliyah looked around. The crowded booths, Carissa humming, Jesse's laughter, the sunlight spilling through clean glass. Mama used to say a place isn't built with money, she murmured. It's built with people. Harlan raised his cup in a quiet toast. Then, here's to the people who remember how. The bell over the door jingled again. More customers entered, faces new and familiar. Outside, the motorcycles still lined the street, gleaming like sentinels. The hum of the engines mixed with the murmur of voices, a rhythm of life reclaimed. Aaliyah took a deep breath. The day felt full. Of noise, of warmth, of meaning. The camera near the window caught one last image before fading to black. The sign above the door, sunlight catching the fresh paint, the words simple and true. Kindness built this place. It was late afternoon when Harlan Dupree walked into Mama Jo's table one last time. The diner was humming softly, sunlight pouring through the windows in wide, golden stripes. Aaliyah was behind the counter, sleeves rolled, wiping down the same section she always did when her mind was elsewhere. He chose the booth by the window, the same one where Marcus once sat trembling, the same one where silence had turned into faith. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a single folded sheet of paper and laid it on the table. When Aaliyah came over with a smile, he slid it toward her. "My final report," he said. She hesitated before opening it. Across the page, written in steady black ink, were only 8 words. Final conclusion. Kindness requires no conditions to exist. Aaliyah's lips parted, and for a moment she just stared at the words. "So," she said softly, "you finally believe it." Harlan smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing. "I believed it the day you handed me coffee without asking my name. I just needed to prove it. To them. To myself." She looked around the diner. The tables were full, laughter overlapping like music. Carissa was serving pie to a pair of students. Marcus and Jesse were stacking napkins near the window, still teasing each other. "Looks like the town proved it too," she said. "They did," Harlan agreed, "but they needed someone to show them what it looked like first." He took a slow breath as if steadying himself and pulled something else from his jacket. A small silver key attached to a tag engraved with careful letters. Mama Jo's Foundation. Director, Aaliyah Brooks. She blinked, unsure she understood. "What is this?" "The Foundation's new branch," he said simply. "You'll run it. Scholarships, community kitchens, rebuilding projects. All in your name, all rooted here. People will see what kindness can do when it's given form." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're serious?" "I've never been more," Harlan said. "You built something money couldn't buy. Now I want to help it grow." Aaliyah reached out but didn't take the key right away. "You know, I never wanted to be part of any test," she said gently. "I just didn't want the world to go colder." "And that," he said, "is exactly why you were the answer." The diner had gone quieter now, as if the walls were listening. Aaliyah finally picked up the key. It was small, almost weightless, yet her hand trembled as she closed her fingers around it. "Thank you," she said, "not for the gift, for seeing me." Harlan nodded. "The world needs to see you now." He stood, adjusted his coat, and paused at the door. The afternoon light cut across his face, soft and fading. "You were never part of an experiment, Aaliyah. You were its proof." Then he smiled, half bittersweet, half proud. "Keep it open," he said. "Always," she replied. When he left, the bell gave one quiet chime, the sound carrying longer than usual before the door fell shut. Aaliyah stayed standing there, watching through the glass as Harlan crossed the street and disappeared into the crowd. She looked down at the key in her palm, its surface catching a sliver of sunlight, and then at the words painted on the wall beside the counter. Kindness built this place. She walked to the window, pressed her hand lightly to the glass, and whispered to the empty air, "Thank you for seeing me." Outside, the wind rose, gentle but full, rippling through the flag over the diner. Children ran past, their laughter echoing off the storefronts. The camera lingered on the sign above the door. Fresh paint, soft edges, bright in the last light of day. The sound of footsteps, a bell, and distant laughter faded together as the frame steadied on 6 simple words. Mama Jo's Foundation. Run by Aaliyah Brooks. Then the wind moved once more, carrying the laughter further down the street, until all that remained was the quiet glow of the diner and the truth the world had nearly forgotten. That real kindness is always seen,